Good morning, Title I coordinators, and thank you for joining us for our spooky Halloween Title I webinar for today. My name is Erin Sudduth, and I'm the branch manager of the Title I Part A Support and Improvement branch at the Kentucky Department of Education. So as always, and I mentioned this right when we started, for those of you joining on Teams, make sure that your mic is muted and your camera's turned off. I think everybody's already done that. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions or comments, if you're on Teams, you can just put those in the Teams chat. If you're watching through the media portal, if you want to send those to me via email, that is erin.sudduth@education.ky.gov. We will have time at the end for questions, so if you want to raise your hand and come off mute at that point, you can do that as well. And we are recording our webinar. It will be posted on our Documents and Resources webpage. That'll probably be tomorrow. If you weren't able to join us for the September webinar, make sure you go and watch that recording. We had all our usual announcements and reminders, and then the main focus was the comparability report, how to calculate it, common issues and troubleshooting, types of documentation you need to save to support the approved report, and some examples, as well as a new resource for documenting staff. So for today, we have our usual announcements and reminders, and then our main focus is going to be looking at the revised Title I Part A handbook. Not a lot of announcements for today. That comparability report that I just mentioned, that is due in the GMAP district document library tomorrow. So make sure that you've done that. When I checked this morning, it looked like there were about 29 districts who still need to submit. Remember, everybody has to submit that, even if you don't have to calculate comparability. In that case, you're only going to do that first page and go ahead and upload that. Also remember that that document is an Excel file. It has a lot of kind of hidden behind the scenes formulas and things in it. You cannot open that in Google Sheets or Apple Numbers or whatever. That has to be in Excel. We've had a lot of people reaching out saying that they're having problems with it, and almost every time it has been that they're not doing it in Excel. And if you have any questions, you can contact your district's Title I consultant, and they'll help you out with that. We have also selected and notified the 10 districts who are going to be part of consolidated monitoring this year. They got that notification on October 1st. We also have notified 11 districts, I believe last Thursday or Friday, we notified them that they've been selected for Title I desk monitoring. So if you did not receive either of those, then you are not being monitored for this year. Okay, here's our timeline as far as obligating those 310L funds for this school year. Remember, this is just kind of an estimate to help keep you on track to make sure that you're not carrying over more than 15% on September 30th of 2025. So at this point, you should have obligated about 22, 23%, somewhere around there. If you're significantly below that, make sure that you're checking in with your finance officer and that you're going to be on track. Of course, once your consolidated application receives full approval and you're able to start drawing down on your funds, you can use Project L funds to go back and pay for allowable and approved expenditures dating back to July 1. So keep that in mind as well. Great. And these are all of the different projects that are open at the moment. We've got 310J, 310K, and 310L. We do have some updates for 310J, and I think I did more detail about these last month where we did get that extension from USED. So there's no dates coming up within the next few months that we really need to focus on for any of these. All right, our October newsletter is up on our website. We've got just a summary of that statewide federal programs training that we did in Lexington last month. A reminder that technical support is available from your district's assigned consultant. You can always reach out. That's not just for new district coordinators. A reminder about the comparability report. We've got an article about the importance of avoiding handing Title I funds or equipment ownership directly to private schools. So if you serve private schools, make sure that you take a look at that. Also, a little announcement about consolidated monitoring. Our principal's perspective article is a really important one, discussing the compact at elementary conferences. We've talked about it before and how that is a very common monitoring finding. So be sure that you've looked at that and that you've shared that with all the principals, your elementary level principals. It's only an elementary level requirement. An announcement about that waiver that I just mentioned being approved, and then our usual recurring articles about all of our open projects, our coordinators year at a glance, and things like that. So if you are not receiving that newsletter, just let me know and I can add you to the subscriber list. I can also add your building principals if you'd like me to do that. Just let me know and we can send that out to whoever would benefit from it. All right, so the main thing we're looking at today is our Title I handbook, which was recently revised. And I did send an email out to all of you, I guess it's probably been about 2 weeks ago. So we review our handbook and a lot of our other resources every year just to make sure everything is still accurate and up to date, make sure that it's as clear as it can be. For the past few years, the Title I handbook updates have been fairly minimal, just kind of some minor wordsmithing, updating broken links, that kind of a thing. So this year it had a much more in-depth update. So the first thing you're going to notice is that it is more concise. It's about 30 pages shorter. Hang on. Okay. That does not mean that we cut back on the content. It actually has more programmatic information than the previous version. This was just like cleaning up formatting, removing some repetitive statements, resources that are already posted on our website. We were able to really shorten the handbook pretty significantly. Some of the sections have been rearranged just to kind of create a better flow, and I'll try to point some of those out when we take a look at the handbook itself in just a minute. There are some brand new additions to the handbook. Now, if you regularly watch these webinars, you review newsletters and emails and all our other resources, there shouldn't be anything in the revised handbook that is brand new to you. As I reviewed the content this year, I noticed that there were several things that we discussed with districts a lot, but they weren't really in the handbook or they didn't have a lot of detail in the handbook. So we went in and added that stuff. There's also a focus on program requirements and alignment to the monitoring checklist. So I really tried to make sure that the handbook focuses on all of the basic program requirements. And one of the ways that I did that was just compare it to our monitoring checklists, which represent all of the areas that KDE staff check for in terms of compliance when we're monitoring. So I tried to make sure that there was additional information in the handbook on all of those monitoring indicators. I also expanded on some of them where we do see those more frequent findings. We've incorporated some recent updates. So if you were at that federal programs training last month, you'll remember that Edgar and the Uniform Grant Guidance have been recently updated. Those updates went into effect on September 30th, so that means that they're going to apply to school year 25-26 funds. So those are already incorporated, and I'll be making some updates to our other resources throughout this year just to make sure that everything reflects those changes. And some of the templates in our sample documents folder were a bit outdated, maybe unnecessary, so those have been removed. We've also added 2 new resources in that folder. One is that comparability report staffing documentation that I shared last month. And then there's another one to help elementary schools document that compact discussion that I mentioned. So we'll take a look at that in just a minute after we go over the handbook changes. So with that, I'm going to switch us from our PowerPoint to the handbook itself. Let me get it here. Okay. All right. So as I scroll through this, you'll, again, probably notice some of those formatting changes that I mentioned. I'm really going to only focus on the sections where there's been the more substantial content changes. So if I skip over an entire section, that just means there weren't any major changes to it. Right. So in our introduction to Title I section, we've got a new overview of the legal citations that are referenced throughout the handbook, just so you know kind of what is EDGAR, what is Uniform Grant Guidance, KAR, KRS, all of those things. Okay. Moving on to page 5. So at the bottom of page 5, we've got just a list of the documents that are in that sample documents folder. So you'll notice that there are some changes to that. And then on page 6, this is a brand new piece of information, just an overview of our Title I Committee of Practitioners. Right, now we're going to skip to the parent and family engagement section, specifically the testing transparency section. This has been expanded to provide additional detail on the 2 pieces of that testing transparency requirement. And there's going to be another resource coming out in the coming weeks or months about that as well. And then there are several new items under the school parent and family engagement requirements section. So up first is the annual meeting. Now, the annual meeting's always been referenced in the handbook. It's been in the school parent and family engagement policy section. So now we have this separate paragraph just going into some more detail, really explaining what is the annual meeting, what type of information should you be sharing with parents at that meeting. We've also got just some recommendations, such as holding the meeting at the beginning of the school year to really help set the tone for the whole year. Also, trying to pair the meeting with a highly attended event like an open house or a back to school bash, something like that. That'll just help ensure that you're really maximizing the number of parents who get that information. And then we're going to go to page 21. Right, we have a reminder right here kind of at the top of page 21 about parent and family engagement policies and how simply restating the required information is not sufficient. And of course, we've got links to all of our recently created templates for the policy and the compact as well. So remember that during monitoring, we've talked about this before, we will review district and school parent and family engagement policies that say, the district or the school will, and then they just list all of the ESSA requirements. There's no additional detail. That is not sufficient to meet the requirement. ESSA says that you have to describe how the district or the school will meet those. So our templates that we shared back in April, those you are not required to use, but if you would like to use them, I think they would really help you make sure that you are getting the information that you're supposed to have in those documents. Okay, and then I've also added a paragraph about discussing that compact in relation to individual student achievement during at least one parent-teacher conference, again, at the elementary level only. And I already told you guys, this is a very common finding during monitoring. And again, we will have a new resource to share with you after we look at these handbook changes. Right, next is services to eligible private school children. I'm going to look at pages 24 and 25. So there's some new information, here it is, regarding the control of funds and carryover. These are also areas where we encounter a lot of misconceptions and or issue monitoring findings. So I've just added some explanations about how the funds do not belong to the private school and that they should really be spent during the year in which they are received. So a lot of times when we're monitoring or when somebody reaches out for technical assistance, we hear things like, the private school isn't spending their money. It's important to remember that the private school does not have money to spend. The district has money that's generated by private school students that the district spends on equitable services at those participating schools. So the responsibility to spend that money belongs to the district. And you can refer back to our January webinar for additional information about equitable services. Then, let's see, I'm going to go to page 28. We've got just a really brief paragraph here about resources, materials, and supplies. We get a lot of questions about just purchasing supplies for private school students. Is that allowable? And non-regulatory guidance says no, that does not constitute a program, so you should not be doing that. And then under private school parent and family engagement, right here, yes, at the top of page 29, I added a statement that the policy and compact, those are not required for private schools. You might remember us receiving some clarification from USED a couple months ago and removing that indicator from our district monitoring checklist. So I just went ahead and added it to the handbook as well. Okay, we're going to skip ahead to Title I and Children in Foster Care on page 39. Here we go. So there's a new section in the foster care section. This is about the written transportation agreement between the district and the local child welfare agency. This has been a very common monitoring finding in recent years. I want to point out that this is not the same as a basic transportation policy that I'm sure you all have in your district. This is an agreement that is developed jointly by the district and that child welfare agency. We did review the requirements of this agreement and discuss the available KDE resources during our May webinar, and that is still posted on our webpage, so you can go back and check that out if you'd like some additional information. If you've been selected for monitoring this year, you should be able to provide this signed agreement as well as evidence that it was developed with the Child Welfare Agency. So some email correspondence with them, maybe some meeting minutes, things like that. And the next changes are in the education of homeless children and youth section. And we're going to look at the bottom of page 41. Okay, and 42 a little bit. There we go. So we've just got some expanded information on district requirements here. The first one is the homeless education posters. This refers to the educational rights posters. There are English and Spanish versions. All of those should be on display in the district office and at all of the schools. Now, in addition to displaying the posters, you need to make sure that the correct district and state contact information is included on them. There's space at the bottom for the district homeless liaison, as well as the state homeless education contact. This is new in this section of the handbook. It also has some recommendations about placing the posters in high traffic areas like the front office, as well as maybe throughout the community in any shelters, libraries, grocery stores, etc., just to help really make sure that this information is readily available. And districts can order up to 10 of these posters each year at no cost, and the link to do that is in the handbook. This is something that KDE staff look for when we are on-site monitoring. We've also got some expanded information in the policies and procedures section. Let's see, specifically, here it is. The procedures for awarding credit, including partial credit, as well as procedures for awarding diplomas to homeless students. The procedures to award credit and partial credit for coursework satisfactorily completed by homeless children and unaccompanied youth, that should also include steps for implementation. So it's kind of similar to what I said about parent and family engagement policies. Simply stating that the district will award credit and partial credit to homeless students, that is not sufficient to meet this requirement. And KDE does have a checklist to help districts develop those procedures, and that's included right here in the handbook as well. Right. Next, we're going to look at the time and effort section of the handbook. So on page 54, this has just kind of been reorganized to provide a clearer outline of the required procedures. So again, let's see, you can see right here, these procedures must include instructions for meeting the requirements. So not just saying that you're going to do it, you need to say how you're going to do it. And some of the information that you need to include, of course, completion of time and attendance reporting, the approval cycle that is required. Let's see. The process of personal charges to federal awards, internal review process. So who's looking at this? Who's making sure that it's accurate? Who do people turn this into? All of these things should be outlined in those procedures. Okay, and next, at the very end of that time and effort section, I've added a time and effort example. This is regarding after the fact calculation for employees that are paid from multiple cost objectives. So when we say cost objectives, we're talking about a funding source. So maybe somebody who's paid from Title I Part A and general funds, for example. I do want to take a closer look at this quickly because I think it helps people understand time and effort a little better. So when we think about somebody who's paid from multiple cost objectives like Title I and general funds, they probably don't do the exact same amount of work each and every day. So some days it could be split. They could work on Title I and stuff for their general funds. Other days, they might spend the whole day just on that one cost objective, and that's okay. So those employees are probably filling out something like a personnel activity report, a PAR. So on a document like a PAR, all that person should be doing is just documenting how they actually spent their time, however that may be. What they're not doing is thinking, okay, here's how I'm paid. I need to work backwards and make sure that this document reflects that. They're recording their actual breakdown of how they use their time. So if they're paid 50% from Title I and 50% from general funds, it doesn't mean that every day they spent 4 hours on each of those. It's the district's responsibility at the end of the year, at the end of the period, like the semester, they need to go back and calculate the time that that employee spent on each project and make sure that it matches that full-time equivalency or FTE that they've reported in GMAP. Now, if it doesn't, then the district needs to go back and probably make some adjustments to GMAP as well as the budget. Hey, I'm excited about this one. This is an entirely new section, fiscal management. Now, a lot of this information was kind of referenced in various places throughout the previous handbook. And of course, we've already had several resources available about these topics, but now it's all in one place in the handbook for a little more easy reference. Now, fiscal management could probably be its own handbook all by itself. So we don't get too into the weeds in this section. It is kind of a general overview, and it also directs you to some of those additional resources that are related to these topics. So at first, we've got allowability of purchases. And of course, additional information is available on our allowable cost checklist and procedures document that's linked there. There's also a link to the KDE webpage with all of the funding matrices. And the current matrix for Title I and other ESSA programs is the 2024-25 non-competitive federal funding matrix. Now remember, the matrix tells you which object codes are allowable for the grant, what you can actually put in the GMAP budget, what you can put in Enterprise ERP. But allowability doesn't end there. The steps in your allowability procedures to determine if a purchase is reasonable, allocable, and necessary, that's what helps you determine if a purchase is approvable. Oh, whoops, sorry, I meant to hit down and I think I hit up. Okay, there we go. The next section within fiscal management is preventing misuse of taxpayer funds and reporting wrongdoing. This includes the requirement to display that Office of the Inspector General fraud hotline poster that I talked about during our August webinar. And the fraud hotline poster is another thing that KDE staff are going to be looking for if we come to your district for consolidated monitoring this year. Preventing misuse of taxpayer, oh, sorry, I just read that. The next section is GMAP and Enterprise ERP alignment. So as you may be aware, the financial software that all of our Kentucky districts use is now called Enterprise ERP or EERP instead of Munis. So that's going to be an adjustment for all of us to not say Munis. This alignment is the common finding during monitoring, and we talk about it pretty frequently, but now there's an explanation in the handbook just kind of explaining why you need to have this alignment. We should not see different object codes or different amounts budgeted in EERP versus GMAP. We shouldn't see excessive over or under spending. This alignment helps ensure that requirements like rank and serve order for our Title I schools is maintained. Okay, timely expenditure of funds and carryover. It's important that districts obligate Title I funds in a timely manner and avoid that excessive carryover. So this is just a little overview, and then of course a link to our carryover information document, which has a lot more detail to it. Transferability of funds, this was already in the handbook in another location, but now it's here with all the fiscal management stuff. Safeguarding assets. We recently discussed the importance of this during our July webinar. So there's a brief overview as well as a link to our Safeguarding Assets resource. Maintenance of effort, that was already in there. Then we've got comparability, which I think we've talked about enough over the last month. I don't need to really look at any of that. Okay, next is supplement, not supplant. So remember that ESSA changed the supplement, not supplant requirements for Title I Part A. They're different than all of the other title programs. Instead of looking at individual expenditures, we're looking at a methodology and supporting calculations to show that state and local funds are distributed by the district to its schools in a Title I neutral manner. We're not saying, oh, we can give this school less general funds because they're going to get Title I. Everybody gets what they would get regardless of Title I participation. I am working on some additional supplement, not supplant resources. So once those are available, I'll be sure to let you know. And then we have just a very high level overview of procurement at the end of this fiscal management section. Okay, then we have ESSA waivers of statutory and regulatory requirements. This is a new section. It's just an overview of all of the allowable waivers under ESSA, as well as some information about some of the things that we cannot request waivers for. USAID will not give waivers for. All right, last is the appendix. So previously, the appendix included some of the resources that are also posted as freestanding documents on our Title I Documents and Resources webpage. Now we just have those documents linked throughout the handbook in the appropriate sections. We don't also repeat them in the appendix. That's part of what helped us really cut down on the length of this document. So we do still have our coordinator's year at a glance. So as you know, we always run whatever the current month's tasks are in our newsletter. And as we do that, we inevitably end up making some minor changes. So the version now in this handbook includes all of those recent updates and tweaks to the activities that you should be looking at each month. Appendix B. This is new, and this just provides a bird's eye view of the types of resources and information that's available on our Documents and Resources webpage. We sometimes run a similar article in the newsletter, and we share this information with our new coordinators, but now it's just here for everybody's reference in the handbook. And then, of course, we've got our glossary. We had this before, and I think there were maybe one or two very tiny changes. Right, and then the last thing I want to look at before we go back to the PowerPoint is this new resource. So I mentioned one more new sample document that is now available to you. And this is about that school family compact discussion. We issue a lot of findings over this, and it could be for a variety of reasons. It could be because the conversation's not occurring at all. But it could also be because the conversation is not being properly documented. So this just reviews the ESSA requirements, kind of here at the top. And then it's also got some examples of effective documentation that we've seen used in schools when we monitor. So these particular methods aren't required. These are just some suggestions of effective methods that we've seen on-site in districts. So we've got conference invitations. So invitation to parent-teacher conference that really specifies, we're going to talk about the compact and we're going to talk about how it relates to your child's achievement. Maybe email reminders to teachers telling them, be sure you're talking about this. Here's how you need to talk about it. We've also seen some districts with conference agendas or talking points that each teacher has, and it includes that information about the compact and discussing it as it relates to the individual child, not just sharing, here's the compact, but really getting into the details with it. And then another common method of documentation is conference sign-in sheets. We know a lot of schools use sign-in sheets to document which parents attend conference night. Now, I want to point out that if the sign-in sheet doesn't have any additional information on it, it's just a sign-in, then that's not going to be sufficient evidence. But if you add a space for the parents to verify that the discussion did occur, that would be sufficient. So this resource has a template that you can adopt if you'd like to, where we have space for the parent to sign in and then just a circle yes or no. Did you talk about your child's academic achievement in relation to that school family compact? So feel free to use that if you would like.
There's one in the chat if you're ready for questions. So it was mentioned that the fraud and homeless posters are required to be displayed in the schools. The schools include private schools.
I would probably say no, because the private schools don't have the authority to obligate or spend funds.
Yes,
would you agree with that? Okay.
Yep.
That's a really good question. And let me check my email to see if there are. Okay. Right. I think that is all of the questions. Right. All right, so be sure to mark your calendars for our future webinars. I did recently go in and schedule all of the 2025 webinars. So I've added the remainder of school year 24-25 to this slide. Please note that during February and May, these are only going to be broadcast through Teams rather than Teams and the media portal. Of course, I'll specify that when I send out the reminder email in those months. Those webinars will still be recorded and posted to the webpage like normal. So next webinar is going to be Thursday, November 21st at 10 a.m. Eastern. And as a reminder, there's a link to our monthly webinar feedback survey on the slide. It's also always posted in our monthly newsletters. And this is just a way for you to anonymously submit any feedback, comments, ideas, suggestions of things you'd like to see in newsletters and webinars and things like that. Of course, you can also just email your consultant. You can email me and let us know. We want to make sure that whatever resources we're providing you are helpful and useful to you. All right. And I don't see any more questions. So thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next time.